Tupac Shakur left one of the most important musical legacies of his era and helped to redefine the hip-hop genre. His last year was spent attempting to take control of his turbulent life before meeting a violent end in September 1996. This is what the last 12 months of Tupac's life were like. The first couple of months of the final year of Shakur's life was spent in the Clinton Correctional Facility in New York, where he was finishing a stint after being convicted on sexual assault charges. In November 1993, Shakur and 3 other men were charged with sexually assaulting a fan in the artist's New York hotel room. In February 1995, the rapper-actor was found guilty of first-degree sexual assault and sentenced to 18 months to 4.5 years in prison.
If I have to go to jail, I don't even want to be living.
Up until his death, Shakur denied all the charges and accusations against him. At the trial, Shakur apologized, but also said, "I'm not apologizing for a crime. I hope in time you'll come forth and tell the truth." Judge Daniel P. Fitzgerald did not believe Shakur and told him that his crime was, quote, "an act of brutal violence." And in time, the woman did come forward, publicly revealing in a 2018 interview all the terrible details of the sexual assault perpetrated by Shakur and his associates. Shakur's time in prison lasted from February to October 1995, before he was released on a $1.4 million bail posted by Death Row Records CEO Suge Knight. Despite being convicted of sexual assault on a female fan and being in prison for a lot of 1995, Tupac's relationship with his girlfriend Keisha Morris continued. Tupac and Morris met in June 1994 at a Chippendales club, and the night ended with the pair dancing and exchanging numbers. You'd expect that the pair's relationship would hit a snag when Shakur was sent to prison, but during that time, Shakur became more reliant on Morris. He asked her to take care of all his finances. As Morris later recalled in an interview, "Tupac asked me to handle all of his business because he wanted me to represent him. He felt it would be better and easier if I were married to him. I was kinda hesitant, but I agreed." On April 29, 1995, in front of Tupac's mother and his cousin, the pair got married. However, the whirlwind romance did not last long. In late July of the same year, Shakur and Morris unofficially divorced. They officially split a week after he was released from prison that October. While incarcerated in prison, Tupac asked Morris to call the CEO of Death Row Records, Suge Knight, and relay a message. He needed help. Because of the financial strain of lawyers and being unable to tour, make new music, or act, not only was Shakur going broke, but his mother Afeni Shakur was close to losing her house. Reggie Wright Jr., the head of security at Death Row, said that Knight sent the jailed rapper $15,000 to alleviate Shakur's financial struggles. After the act of generosity, Shakur and Knight set up a meeting in prison, at which Knight and Death Row's lawyer David Kenner said they would help him get released on an appeal bond. Knight would have seemed like an angel from heaven for Shakur. Kevin Powell writes about a conversation he had with Shakur in December 1995 in his memoir, The Education of Kevin Powell. Shakur told him that he trusted Suge Knight to protect him from his enemies. Powell also said that Shakur talked about being angry with a number of people. From a business perspective, it made sense for Suge Knight to try to entice one of the best rappers around to his label. Shakur signed with Death Row on September 16, 1995. A month later, Shakur was released on a $1.4 million bail paid by Knight as they appealed his conviction. The rivalry between Los Angeles-based Death Row Records and the New York-based label Bad Boy Records was the height of the rivalry between the East and West Coasts in hip-hop. Hip-hop music was born and developed in New York City, and when the genre exploded in popularity and began to spread around the country, the East Coast remained its base. However, West Coast performers felt that their music was ignored and downplayed on New York radio, while East Coast performers felt the same way on the West Coast. Suge Knight both unintentionally and intentionally threw gasoline on this fire. First, with the unprecedented success of his Death Row Records, the center of hip-hop shifted from New York to California. The company's first 2 albums, Dr. Dre's The Chronic and Snoop Doggy Dogg's Doggy Style, sold more than 13 million copies. Knight intentionally stroked the flames at the 1995 Source Awards that August, when he took some not-so-subtle shots at Bad Boy Records CEO Sean Puffy Combs. Thus, when Shakur stepped out of jail to join Death Row Records, he immediately became a target in the ongoing feud. The final 12 months of Tupac's life were marked with several feuds, with his beef with the notorious B.I.G., born Christopher Wallace, the most well-known. His disputes extended to several rappers from the East Coast, as well as an influential politician and a former death row colleague. Tupac's feud with his former friend Wallace began when Shakur was shot at Quad Studios in November 1994. He believed that Wallace and Sean Combs, who were in the studio at the time, were responsible for the shooting. Both Combs and Wallace denied the accusations, but that didn't stop Shakur from claiming to sleep with Wallace's wife, singer Faith Evans, which she denied, and releasing the diss track Hit 'Em Up, which called out Wallace and Combs. Other New York MCs that Tupac had beefs with included Mobb Deep, Nas, the Fugees, and Jay-Z. Even Dr. Dre, who produced Tupac's hit song California Love, 2 months after he left prison and helped establish Death Row with Suge Knight, was in Shakur's scope after leaving the label in March 1996. 2 songs he released in 1996, including How Do You Want It, attacked Congresswoman C. Dolores Tucker, who had launched a campaign against gangsta rap and the labels producing the music. Shakur's attacks against the Congresswoman ultimately led to a $10 million lawsuit against his estate. Almost immediately upon being bailed out of prison by Suge Knight and signing a 3-album deal with Death Row Records, Tupac recorded his first album at his new Death Row home. All Eyez on Me became Shakur's 4th studio album and the last he would release during his life. In an interview with LA Times journalist Chuck Phillips, Shakur described his focus and commitment with his first album since leaving prison. "I have been in the studio since the day after I got out, about 12 hours a day, up until they kicked me out." In just 2 weeks, Shakur recorded 27 tracks for the double album, which would eventually hit diamond status. Upon finishing the album, Shakur still was very much focused on making music.
I feel like I'm doing God's work.
Producer Johnny J said that the rapper had started working on something similar to his 3rd album, Me Against the World, before focusing on another project. Tupac Shakur was far from a one-trick pony. He began his career in the entertainment industry as a dancer for the Oakland, California hip-hop group Digital Underground. In 1992, Tupac premiered in his first leading role as Bishop in the critically and commercially successful film Juice. In the final year of his life, he found time between recording music to act in his 2 final movies, Gang Related and Gridlocked, both released in 1997. Preston Holmes, a producer for Gridlocked, had this to say about Tupac's on-set work ethic. "Tupac never seemed to rest. While we were shooting Gridlocked, he was working every day on a tough, low-budget film. Then he was recording, doing music videos, and writing non-stop. He felt like he had to make the most of what time he had left." Filming for Gang Related ended on August 31, 1996, a week before Shakur would be fatally wounded in a drive-by shooting. In the film, Shakur co-stars with Jim Belushi, and both men play corrupt cops who look to frame someone for the death of an undercover DEA agent. The murder of Tupac was the beginning of the decline of Death Row Records. While the company was marred with scandals and a reputation for violence, as well as losing one of their biggest names in Dr. Dre that March, Shakur's star power could have kept the label afloat. However, the decline of Death Row might have been inevitable, as Shakur's relationship with the company was far from happy by the time of his death. In an interview with The Independent, singer Keisha Cole, who was being mentored by Tupac, said Shakur expressed interest to her in leaving the controversial Death Row and signing with legendary producer Quincy Jones. Perhaps not coincidentally, Tupac was also dating Jones's daughter Kidada during this period. According to Cole, who was 16 at the time, Shakur warned her that, quote, "Death Row was not the place for kids." On top of that, Suge Knight's management style, as described in a Trapital article, was, quote, "like a neighborhood pimp." His behavior would have been tolerated by younger, more inexperienced artists, but not veterans like Dr. Dre and Tupac. On the night of September 7, 1996, Tupac Shakur, Suge Knight, and others traveled to Las Vegas to watch Tupac's friend, Mike Tyson, fight Bruce Seldon. Tyson won in a first-round knockout. Following the match, Shakur and his entourage got into a fight in the lobby of the MGM Grand. Shakur returned to his hotel room at the Luxor before leaving with Suge Knight and his entourage for a night on the town. At a red light, a vehicle pulled up next to them and fired into their car before speeding off, hitting Shakur, who was in the passenger seat 4 times. Knight, who was driving, was hit with debris.
Lately, I've been feeling like my luck's been running out.
Shakur would die 6 days later at the age of 25. Many theories and allegations of conspiracies have emerged since that day in 1996, especially connecting the murder to the shooting death of the notorious Biggie in 1997. In August 1996, Tupac returned to the studio to record the second of his contracted 3 albums for Death Row. The album, The Don Illuminati, The 7-Day Theory, was released on November 5th, 2 months after his murder. The album also led to theories that Shakur faked his death and is still alive. According to the source, the album was highly influenced by the Italian philosopher and writer Niccolò Machiavelli, who is also believed to have faked his own death. Tupac dons the name Machiavelli for the album, which was much darker and more focused on death than his previous album with Death Row. The last 12 months of Tupac Shakur's life were marred with controversy. Still, Shakur was able to fulfill his dreams as a multi-talented artist. 6 months following his death, his coastal rival and former friend, the notorious B.I.G., would die in a similar drive-by shooting in Los Angeles, marking the end of the East-West rivalry and closing a tragic chapter in the history of hip-hop. Check out one of our newest videos right here. Plus, even more grunge videos about your favorite stuff are coming soon. Subscribe to our YouTube channel and hit the bell so you don't miss a single one.